As I'm thinking about it, as we're talking, I think the other institution that hasn't gotten is academia. And we saw the Trump administration this week push back on Harvard. And to me, I frankly, first of all, I was just appalled to find out that Harvard, with this massive endowment, is getting $9 billion with a B dollars a year of our tax dollars. First of all, I think that in itself, regardless of whether or not they're DEI or not DEI or whatever, or anti-Semitic, I think that the idea that Harvard is getting $9 billion and Columbia is getting whatever they are is in itself the true crime here. But I found it fascinating because they are now trying to push back. I think this is the fight that the Trump administration double and triple down on.
I actually agree with this. The thing is, what the government has done is it's outsourced research to universities. So that's research is where, universities are where the scientists are, where the professors are. So they say, here's, $1 billion and go find out how we can build a better bomb or do the kinds of things the government wants to do. And they are not allowed by Supreme Court rulings to attach political requirements to that, but they have been allowed to say you have to follow certain rules like the civil rights laws. Now, Barack Obama used that force to get them to strip males of their due process rights when they were accused of sexual malfeasance. So any girl who said, you raped me, the guy was instantly convicted because of Obama, the pressure put on by the Obama administration. Joe Biden wanted to rewrite Title IX so it applied to poodles dressed up as women or whatever, it was just like anything that they decided was a woman could be decided as a woman. Nobody said a word about that. Nobody complained about it at all in the mainstream media. Suddenly, Donald Trump would like them to please stop hating Jews, and that's a problem. Now he's a tyrant. So I think, Donald Trump, as he has done so often throughout this brilliant second term, has chosen the, things that reveal to us how bad the left is. We've got leftists defending the rights of gang members while, basically shrugging off the rights of American citizens who don't want to be killed by gang members. And now we've got them defending basically the right of colleges to teach anti-Semitism. It is just despicable. I understand why the government gives money to colleges, but you get college like Hillsdale that won't take a dime from the government, and they're absolutely free. If Harvard wants to do that, then they'll be absolutely free to teach whatever garbage they want to teach.
That's a great point. I mean, these guys act like somehow, great, Hillsdale doesn't take it. I don't know that maybe Liberty University does some now, but I know for a while they didn't. And those are great institutions. I don't know why. I mean, here's the thing. Do you think that I mentioned that Trump should double and triple down on this, but if you had a crystal ball and looked ahead, do you think that we ultimately win the fight against, because I think this is bigger. Like when you think about what college and university does to indoctrinate the next generation of Americans, I think this is really the fight worth having, right? You raise your kids, you can send them to whatever school you want through high school. You're there to hold their hand, K through 12, they come home. But when they go to college, that's when you're not there anymore. And the college gets a free shot at indoctrinating them. I think from a Trump administration standpoint, this is a critical fight to have, to start removing this, because it's more than just the funding. It's about making sure that we have a fair fight, that conservatives can be on campus, that there's not an indoctrination anymore. But if you're going to have one big fight, I think this has got to be it, because higher learning is like the gateway drug to wokeism.
That's exactly right. I mean, the people in the news media who are corrupting their audiences and the people in Hollywood are corrupting their audiences are mostly graduates from high-level institutions that have polluted their minds with a theory that is developed. Now, since it's Good Friday, I will offer this insight, because the theories that have destroyed our academic life, that have destroyed especially the liberal arts in academia, so that it's virtually useless to go and get an English degree like I did way back in the 1970s, and I got a great education in English literature. Now it's useless because they're teaching you that you have to be transgressive, that all these books should be used to destroy, anti-feminist ideas or anti-communist ideas, whatever it is. The problem is the train of thought that led them to the stuff, the truly trashy stuff they're teaching now, all grows out of atheism. It all grows out of materialism, the idea that everything is stuff. And if we don't start to push the idea that God is a reality. It's not a religion. It's not even about religion. It's about the reality of the fact that we live in a created world, and that creation is a beautiful thing. It's not a problem that there are men and women. It is a gift that there are men and women, and we should emphasize. People act that because women wear dresses and when men wear pants, that somehow that's where their femininity and masculinity comes from. But no, that's something we do because we love the fact that there are men and women. We celebrate it and we enhance it because it's a gift we've gotten from our Creator. If we don't start talking bluntly about the fact that God is the first principle of reality, and if we don't start making that argument as conservatives, because it's not going to happen on the left, we're going to lose this fight in academia especially. And because these are well thought out ideas, I've read a lot of these ideas that they're teaching, and they're well thought out ideas that depend upon an idea that everything just evolved accidentally, that we're all just flesh, that if I cut off my bits and reshape my body into a woman's body, suddenly I'm a woman, which is a complete nonsense. And those ideas make sense if we're living in a materialist world. But not only does all human experience testify against that, but science now testifies against that too. We now know that consciousness comes before reality. And if that's true, well, where did reality come from? So look, I'm not trying to prove the existence of God. I'm simply saying that those of us who believe have got to start talking like we believe and stop accepting the materialist dictum that you can't make an argument from God. That's not true. You have to make our arguments from God. When people say, for instance, like my friend Matt Walsh, when he says, what is a woman? The answer to that is a spiritual answer, not necessarily just a physical answer. A woman is an actual internal thing that happens to you when you are born female. And just like, masculinity is a spiritual thing that happens to you when you're born male. And if we don't start talking about that and celebrating creation as it was given to us, I think ultimately we're just going to get out debated by idiots who believe things that are not tenable and not really believable.
But, to your point, words matter here. I was thinking as you were talking, like this whole week, the media keeps talking about this man from Maryland that was deported, right? In the same way that we talk about what is a woman.
Yeah.
And I know that's as you were talking about this, I kept thinking to myself, this is exactly, the words matter in all of this. Like in the same way that Matt asked, what is a woman? And people couldn't answer the question, right? And then, by the way, he did, am I a racist or am I racist, which I also love. But like when you start saying, like when this story came on to the forefront, I was thinking to myself, oh my God, a Maryland man got deported. That's horrible.
Yeah.
And then I started to realize he's as much of a Maryland man as I am an astronaut. Like, and I joked with somebody, they said, well, he was in Maryland. I said, okay, so let's just back this up for a second. If I'm in Foxborough watching the New England Patriots, am I a patriot? Like what, cause they were like, well, he was in Maryland. I'm like, okay, that doesn't make him a Maryland man.
Right.
As much as that makes me like, I can go to a restaurant and be eating and be, a McDonald's owner. It's like, they are using the words to create a narrative. And I think this gets back to this idea of culture and everything else, that you want to dilute this because this goes to the heart of what you're talking about. This is it's agnostic. We can't make it spiritual. We have to make everything like a Maryland man. What is a woman? Because if we have a conversation about spiritual stuff, it undermines the left's entire argument.
That's right. And it's so much about language. If it weren't about language, they wouldn't police language with the force that they do. Anything you say that is a fact becomes racist. So you've got to somehow work around that to not be called racist. Now, I don't know whether they're particularly good at this, because it has always seemed to me the left has been much better at naming things. So, Ron DeSantis in Florida passes a perfectly good law about leaving children alone, keeping your sexual perversion out of the minds of elementary school kids. And they immediately call it the don't say gay law. And you think that's pretty good. That does make you sound kind of silly. My favorite, I think, was in a morbid way, was gender affirming care, which is butchering children in the completely superstitious idea that will change their sex. I mean, that's a Joseph Mengele Nazi doctor level atrocity. And yet they came up with this beautiful phrase for gender affirming care. And, one of the rare letters I ever wrote to an editor was when the Wall Street Journal used that. I said, what are you talking about? It's like Joseph Mengele using like Jew affirming care. What kind of insanity is that? But they're so good at it. I think they're really good at it because they have owned the media. And I think that is the big change, that because of the internet, because we have defeated the Biden administration's attempt to silence voices on the right, because Elon Musk took over X, because the Daily Wire exists, because of all of these things, we have taken back the ability to impose a different vision on the culture, and hopefully one that is supportive of freedom, of, the individual, of the holiness of being a human being. These are things that we should not be afraid to talk about. When I talk to my friends in England, I lived in England for a long time. When I talk to my friends in England, they almost can't understand what you're talking about when you talk about God. It's been so beaten out of them. So, Vice President Vance was correct when he said you can get arrested in England and put in jail in England for praying silently too near an abortion clinic, even if you're praying silently in your own home. When I say to people in Britain, when I say to my friends, what on earth are you talking about? They don't even really realize that is a fundamental, transgression against human rights. They don't realize it. And if we don't start to use the language properly, and we don't start to use it fearlessly, then we're going to be in that same situation. This is the gift of Donald Trump. From the very beginning, when I first saw Donald Trump, I was like horrified. I thought, who the hell is this guy who is running for president? And then I started to realize, they have so wrapped us up in chains of political correctness. We are so afraid to speak, so afraid to move, that it takes a guy like this to break those chains. And when he starts to win elections, and when he starts to become popular with the young, suddenly people think like, oh, I can do that too. He has done a great, great service to this country simply by being himself. And I think in a moment when any other country almost no other country would have produced a character like Trump. He's an incredibly American character who would break those chains. And I think we have to follow him in the sense of being fearless and speaking our minds. Look, I don't want people to be hateful either. I don't want people to be racist and cruel to each other and, hate each other on stupid grounds of, what color your skin is. But I do want to speak the truth, no matter who it brings into focus. Even if I say there's a lot of crime in black neighborhoods, that's not a racist statement. That's a true statement. And it's only an act of kindness to address that problem. So I think that the truth, fearlessness, all of these things are things that are in the offing in this moment, and we should seize that moment.
So, like I said, your book, The Kingdom of Cain, Finding God in the Literature of Darkness. When we started the week, I went on a rant because Saturday Night Live kicked off Holy Week in their cold open by mocking Donald Trump. And frankly, my opinion, mocking Easter and the beauty of this week for so many Christians. And yet I can't find the light in that. I can't find the good in that literature of darkness.
Well,
help me.
The problem that we have, I think, is, listen, I admire Christians in Hollywood and Christians in the book publishing business, which is also a really important source of information and entertainment, in that they have found their audience and they serve their audience. And that is a beautiful thing, and it has shown the way for other people to do other things. But what constitutes Christian art has become, I won't say corrupted, but it's become kind of diluted. That's the word I want. It's become diluted. If you go back to the height of Christian art, which was the height of art, as far as I'm concerned, in all the world, when you go back to Bach and you go to Mozart and you go to Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel, and even Shakespeare, who I would include very much as a Christian artist, an artist shaped by Christianity, you are talking about the greatest artists who ever lived, and you're talking about the greatest art ever created, and it covered the world as it really is. You can go to Shakespeare and read Macbeth, and it's a play about murder, it's a play about betrayal, it's a play about just absolute atrocities, and yet you come away realizing that when Macbeth says life is meaningless, a tale told by an idiot, he is saying that because he has separated himself from the moral order and from God, and so he's lost in a meaningless world. Shakespeare isn't saying the world is meaningless. Macbeth is saying the world is meaningless because he has transgressed against God. So what the Kingdom of Cain is about the fact that when great artists take on the subject of evil, and I use murder as an example of evil because there's simply no debating that murder is evil. When great artists take on the subject of evil, they reveal God, even though they're dealing with situations and with people who are not that pleasant. The idea that Christianity has to be pleasant, that it has to be nice, that it has to be family oriented, and it has to come with happy endings actually dilutes the power of Christianity, because when we turn to life, life is not that way. Life is filled with all kinds of obscenity and atrocity. And if you're not prepared for that as a Christian, I think you lose your faith. I became a Christian so late in life. I was baptized when I was 49. I already realized before I embraced God that in order for me to believe, I had to believe in a God of the sad world, a God of this world, not a God of some fairyland that I didn't see existing. So what the Kingdom of Cain is about is a study of murders and how great artists have created art out of those murders, inspired by those murders, and sometimes not great artists have created art, and how that reveals something bright and illuminating about God. It is a way of saying that artists create beauty out of reality, and I believe that that is the answer to the problem of evil. You know, people who don't believe sometimes say, well, how can there be an all-good, all-knowing God if there's so much evil? And the answer is that God sees the beauty of the whole design. And when we see the beauty of the whole design, we will understand. In the meantime, think of a statue like the Pietà. If you've ever seen Michelangelo's Pietà, probably the most beautiful sculpture ever made anywhere. And yet it's a picture of what? Of darkness, of a dead child, a mother with her dead child, of a world with a dead God. It's a portrayal of the worst thing that has ever happened anywhere. And yet it's beautiful. And the question the Kingdom of Cain asks is, if a mortal man can make such beauty out of such sorrow and grief and terror and evil, what can God make of this world once we see his entire plan? And so that's what I want from artists. I want honesty. I want a little less piety. I want a little less conservatism, and I want a lot more truth in their art. And then they will be able to make great art that will reveal the truth to its audience, and that's what we need.
You know, maybe I'm just new to the game, but I'm used to reading Andrew Klavan fiction, and I was fascinated when you came out with the Kingdom of Cain, and really pierced this subject of finding good in darkness. Like, what was it that made you go, okay, I gotta get back into nonfiction?
Well, it was two streams of thought. One is I get asked constantly from Christians these letters that start out, you call yourself a Christian, and the rest of it is, and I think, well, so far you're right. And they say you call yourself a Christian, but you write about murder, you write about prostitutes, you write about gangsters, you write about people who curse and use dirty words. And I think, like, that's the world I see, this is the world in which I believe in God. I don't believe in God in like Oz, in this fairyland where everything is great. I believe in God in this world. And I want to depict that world, because if you can't derive faith from that, you can't derive a faith that will stand. So that was one thing. And the other thing is I had written a book called The Truth and Beauty, which was about poetry and how I believe certain poems, even though that they're not religious poems, reveal, say important things about the Gospels. And I realized that for a long time, Sean, our professors and our teachers have been teaching literature without reference to God. But in fact, almost every work of literature ever written has been written in some way to address the problems that only exist if there's a God. Problems like evil, problems like love, problems like death. These are problems that aren't problems if we're just here and we're monkeys and then we die. Then there's no problem. There's no philosophical problem. But every work of literature that is a work of literature, every work of art that is a work of art, addresses these problems as if there were some reason to believe that life makes sense and there is a moral order. And so what I think is we should return to the arts and take a look at the old books and the new books and say, okay, this is about a subject that maybe scares me a little or depresses me or frightens me. And yet, if I put my trust in the artistic process, I will find something new that will restore my faith. That's been my experience. My experience is that if I look at something, The Sopranos, great example. The Sopranos, absolutely violent, vicious story about terrible people doing terrible things. But if you watch it very closely, it is actually a very faith-based story that is showing you through the darkness where the light is. There's wonderful episodes in that where like Christ is virtually present, and the only people who can't see him are the gangsters, the people in the story, but you can see them if you're watching carefully.
All right, I will get my Tony Soprano fix this weekend. Andrew Klavan, the book Kingdom of Cain is out May 6th, available for pre-order right now. Please go take a look at it. It is not disappointing. I was able to peruse this thing before we sat down. Very impressive, as always. Thank you for joining us. I hope you and your family have a very, very happy and blessed Easter.
You too, Sean. Thanks. It's great to see you.
You bet. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.